It all started with a single phone call that shattered my world. I had been looking forward to our annual family reunion for months, a chance to see my children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren under one roof. But as I picked up the phone that dreary Tuesday morning, my heart sank. It was Emily, my youngest daughter, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "we've decided to cancel the family gathering this year." Her words hit me like a freight train. "What is wrong?" I asked, trying to mask the panic rising in my chest. She paused before answering, choosing her words carefully. But what came next felt like a dagger to my soul. "Because no one can handle your negativity anymore, Mom. You complain about everything, the weather, the news, the way people live their lives. It's exhausting. We love you, but we can't keep subjecting ourselves to it." The line went silent after that, leaving me gripping the phone, tears streaming down my face. The days following that devastating conversation were some of the darkest in my life. My own daughter had declared she wouldn't visit unless I changed my ways. How could this happen? When did I become someone who pushed away the very people I loved most? Wasn't I just being honest? Speaking my mind? Yet now, sitting alone in my dimly lit living room, surrounded by memories of happier times, I realized how far I drifted from the person I once was. I remember the last time we all gathered together. I hadn't noticed then how often I interrupted conversations to point out flaws or share yet another grievance. At first it seemed harmless, a comment here, a critique there, but over time those small moments added up, creating an invisible wall between me and my family. Now they avoided me altogether, afraid of walking on eggshells around my sharp tongue. Even the grandkids, who used to beg me for bedtime stories, made excuses not to come over. Their absence left a void so profound it felt like a physical ache. But worst of all was the shame. For years, I prided myself on being strong, independent, and truthful. But now, faced with the reality of what my negativity had cost me, I saw myself through their eyes, a bitter, resentful woman whose presence drained joy from every room. And for what? To feel superior, to be right. None of it mattered if it meant losing the love of my family forever. It had been weeks since Sarah's bitter confrontation with Emily about her negativity, and though she'd begun to make small changes in how she communicated, another storm was brewing, one she hadn't seen coming. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning when Sarah shuffled into the kitchen wearing her usual oversized sweater and baggy sweatpants. The fabric swished around her legs as she moved, and before she knew it, disaster struck. Her foot caught on the hem of her pants, and she tumbled forward, slamming her hip against the edge of the counter. Pain shot through her body as she collapsed onto the cold tile floor, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, all she could do was lie there, clutching her side, wondering if anyone would even notice if something worse happened to her. The injury left her hobbling for days. But what hurt more than the physical pain was the realization that her appearance had become not just a reflection of neglect, but also a hazard. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just an accident, but deep down she knew better. Her once vibrant wardrobe had been replaced by shapeless garments that made her feel invisible, and apparently clumsy too. But the wake-up call didn't stop there. A few days later, while running errands at the grocery store, Sarah ran into Margaret, an old friend from her book club days. At first, Margaret's smile seemed warm, but as their eyes met, Sarah noticed the flicker of disdain crossing her face. Margaret's gaze swept over Sarah's unkempt hair, wrinkled blouse, and scuffed shoes, and her polite "nice to see you" carried an undertone of pity. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame as Margaret walked away, leaving her standing alone in the aisle. How could this be happening? She used to take pride in her appearance, always dressed impeccably for every occasion. Now she barely recognized herself. The encounter haunted her for days, replaying in her mind like a cruel loop. But the final blow came when her granddaughter Lily called to ask if they could go shopping together. Sarah eagerly agreed, thrilled at the thought of spending time with her beloved grandchild. However, Lily hesitated before saying, "Actually, Grandma, could we maybe meet somewhere instead of walking around together?" When Sarah pressed her for an explanation, Lily admitted quietly, "I'm sorry, Grandma, but your clothes are kind of messy and people stare. I don't want them to judge you or me." Those words cut deeper than any fall or judgmental glance ever could. Sarah hung up the phone, her heart heavy with humiliation. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, seeing not the woman she once was, but a shadow of her former self. The vibrant, confident Sarah, who loved bright colors and perfectly styled hair, had vanished, replaced by someone she barely recognized. That night, as she sat alone in her dimly lit living room, memories flooded back of family gatherings where she'd been the life of the party, of compliments on her impeccable style, of feeling proud and alive. Where had that woman gone, and why had she let herself fade away? After Sarah's fall and the painful realization of how her stubbornness had isolated her, another storm was brewing, one she hadn't anticipated. It began innocently enough with her son Daniel offering to teach her how to use a smartphone. "Mom, it's not that hard," he said one afternoon, his voice tinged with frustration, but also hope. "Everyone uses these now. You can video call us, read messages, even check your emails." But Sarah, clinging to her old ways, waved him off. "I don't need all that fancy nonsense," she snapped, crossing her arms defiantly. "If people want to talk to me, they can pick up the phone like normal human beings." Daniel sighed deeply, his shoulders sagging as if carrying an invisible weight. "Fine, Mom, but don't ask me for help anymore if you refuse to learn." At the time, Sarah dismissed his words as melodrama. She didn't realize then just how prophetic they would prove to be. The first crack in her stubborn armor came weeks later when Sarah received a text message from the hospital, a critical reminder about a follow-up appointment after her fall. The notification blinked silently on her phone, unread and unnoticed. By the time she finally stumbled upon it days later, the appointment window had passed. Her heart raced as panic set in. What if something serious had been missed? Would her negligence cost her dearly? But worse was yet to come. A week later, her family planned a surprise virtual reunion via video call to celebrate her granddaughter Lily's birthday. For hours, Sarah sat alone in her dimly lit living room, staring at her silent phone, unaware that the party was happening without her. When Emily called later to explain, Sarah's voice trembled with a mix of anger and shame. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she demanded, though deep down she knew the fault lay squarely with her own resistance to change. That night, Sarah sat by her kitchen table, the cold glow of her phone mocking her. She thought back to the warmth of laughter during family gatherings, the joy of seeing her grandchildren's faces wake up as they shared stories. Now she felt like a ghost haunting the edges of their lives. Her refusal to adapt wasn't just about pride. It was costing her moments of connection, love, and belonging. The next morning, she swallowed her ego and dialed Daniel's number. "Can you teach me again?" she asked hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. To his credit, Daniel didn't gloat or scold. Instead, he simply said, "Of course, Mom, let's start small." Sarah had always prided herself on being a sentimental soul, someone who cherished the past and held on to every memory with fierce devotion. But her attachment to hoarding had spiraled out of control in ways she never anticipated. The first sign that her cluttered lifestyle was becoming dangerous came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She was making tea in the kitchen when a faint smell of smoke drifted through the air. Panic surged through her as she traced the scent to a stack of old newspapers piled precariously near her stove, a stack she'd been meaning to sort through someday. Sparks from the burner had ignited a corner of the paper, and flames were beginning to lick upward. Her heart pounded as she scrambled for a fire extinguisher, hands trembling so violently that she could barely aim it properly. By some miracle, she managed to douse the flames before they spread further. As she stood there, gasping for breath, her eyes fixed on the charred remains of the newspaper pile, reality hit her like a freight train. Her home, a sanctuary once filled with warmth, had become a tinderbox waiting to explode. But the danger didn't stop there. A few weeks later, her grandson Noah came over for a visit. Sarah loved having him around. His laughter used to fill her house with light, yet this time tragedy struck. While chasing after a toy car, Noah tripped over a mountain of boxes stacked haphazardly in the hallway. He fell hard, scraping his knee against the sharp edge of one of the containers. Blood trickled down his leg as he cried out in pain. Sarah rushed to his side, guilt crashing over her like a tidal wave. She cradled him in her arms, apologizing profusely, but the look of fear and betrayal in his tear-filled eyes cut deeper than any blade. For the first time, she saw her home, not as a cozy haven, but as a hazardous maze that endangered those she loved most. And then disaster struck again during a torrential rainstorm one fateful night. The wind howled outside, and water began seeping into the house faster than Sarah could handle. Frantic, she searched for the main water valve, but years of accumulated clutter made it impossible to locate quickly. Boxes, furniture, and random knickknacks blocked her path at every turn. By the time she finally found the valve buried beneath a chaotic jumble of items, the living room was already ankle-deep in water. Furniture floated like driftwood, photographs warped beyond recognition, and memories once preserved now lay ruined under murky floodwaters. Sarah sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably as the weight of her choices crashed down upon her. What had she done? In trying to hold on to everything, she had lost so much more. That night, sitting amidst the wreckage of her flooded home, Sarah realized something profound. Clinging to the past wasn't preserving her life. It was suffocating it. Every item she refused to let go of had become a chain binding her to regret and isolation. It was time to break free. Sarah's impatience had always simmered beneath the surface, but it wasn't until one fateful afternoon that her temper erupted into something far more destructive. It started innocently enough, a disagreement with her neighbor over a misplaced garden hose. What began as a calm conversation quickly escalated when Sarah felt the woman wasn't listening. Her voice rose sharply, startling birds from nearby trees. "You're impossible," she shouted, slamming the gate so hard it rattled on its hinges. The noise drew attention, and soon another neighbor called the police, fearing things might spiral out of control. When officers arrived, Sarah stood in her driveway, flushed with anger. explaining through gritted teeth that everything was fine. But deep down, shame began to creep in. She realized too late how unhinged she must have seemed. The fallout didn't end there. Days later, Sarah found herself snapping at Clara, the kind-hearted nurse hired to assist her after her fall. Clara had been nothing but patient, helping Sarah regain strength and mobility. But when she suggested Sarah try walking without her cane for short distances, Sarah bristled. "I don't need your experiments," she barked, her words cutting like knives. Clara hesitated, clearly hurt, before quietly gathering her things. "If this isn't working, I'll step aside," she said softly, leaving Sarah alone in stunned silence. Only after the door clicked shut did Sarah feel the weight of what she'd done. She had pushed away yet another person who genuinely cared about her well-being. But the breaking point came during dinner delivery from a local restaurant. Sarah had ordered her favorite meal, expecting perfection. When the server accidentally spilled sauce on the edge of the plate while setting it down, Sarah exploded. "Is this the best you can do?" she snapped, shoving the tray off the table. Food splattered across the floor, plates shattered, and the young man froze, his face pale with shock. For a moment, Sarah felt triumphant. Justice served, but as she looked around at the mess, guilt washed over her. This wasn't who she wanted to be. These bursts of rage weren't just hurting others. They were isolating her further, turning her home into a fortress of regret and frustration. That night, sitting amid the wreckage of broken dishes and cold food, Sarah finally faced the truth. Her impatience wasn't just a flaw, it was a wall she'd built around herself. Each outburst pushed people away, leaving her lonelier than before. It was time to change, not just for herself, but for those who still tried to love her despite it all. Sarah had always considered herself a storyteller, someone who could weave memories into vivid tales that captivated her audience. But what she failed to realize was that not every story belonged to her to tell. One fateful afternoon, during a casual coffee gathering with her neighbors, Sarah recounted an argument between Emily and Daniel, something she had overheard during one of their family dinners. She thought nothing of it at the time. After all, it was just sharing in her mind. However, word quickly spread, and by evening, Emily called her, her voice trembling with rage. "How could you, Mom? That was private," she shouted, tears evident in her tone. Sarah stammered, trying to defend herself, but the damage was done. The rift between them widened overnight, leaving Sarah feeling more isolated than ever. The fallout didn't stop there. A few weeks later, while catching up with her close friend Margaret, Sarah casually mentioned a financial struggle her son-in-law Mark was facing, a detail she'd picked up during yet another family conversation. Unbeknownst to Sarah, Margaret happened to know Mark's colleague, and soon enough the information made its way back to him. When confronted, Sarah brushed it off as harmless gossip, but Mark's reaction was anything but forgiving. His wife, Rachel, Sarah's daughter, stormed into Sarah's house the next day, her face flushed with anger. "You've embarrassed us, Mom. How dare you talk about our lives like they're some kind of public spectacle?" she yelled before walking out, slamming the door behind her. Each betrayal of trust chipped away at Sarah's relationships until even her oldest friends began distancing themselves. One afternoon, her dear friend Patricia, whom she'd known for decades, gently confronted her. "Sarah, I love you, but sometimes your words hurt people. You don't seem to notice how much pain you cause." Though Patricia's tone was soft, the accusation hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Later that week, Patricia stopped answering her calls altogether, and Sarah realized she'd lost yet another meaningful connection because of her inability to hold her tongue. That night, sitting alone in her dimly lit living room, Sarah replayed the day's events in her mind. She thought about the faces of her children, her grandchildren, and now her friends, all marred by disappointment and frustration caused by her own actions. For the first time, she understood the weight of her words. They weren't just stories, they were weapons cutting through the fabric of trust and love she so desperately wanted to preserve. It was clear if she didn't change, she risked losing everything she held dear. Sarah had always prided herself on her independence, but that stubbornness came at a cost she never anticipated. One chilly afternoon, while unloading groceries from her car, Sarah faced a situation that would change her perspective forever. A heavy bag of canned goods sat in the trunk, its weight far beyond what her aging arms could safely handle. As she tried to lift it alone, her muscles strained under the pressure. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Should she ask for help? But pride quickly silenced the thought. I've got this, she muttered to herself, gritting her teeth as she pulled the bag upward. The next thing she knew, pain shot through her leg as she lost her balance and crashed to the ground. Her ankle twisted awkwardly beneath her, and the sound of snapping bone echoed in the quiet parking lot. The hours that followed were among the loneliest of her life. Unable to stand, Sarah lay there, clutching her phone, waiting for someone, anyone, to walk by. When paramedics finally arrived, they confirmed her worst fear, a broken ankle. At the hospital, Sarah found herself surrounded by sterile walls and cold machinery, with no familiar faces nearby. Her children lived miles away, and her neighbors had long since stopped checking in on her, not out of malice, but because she'd pushed them away so many times before. Lying in that bed, staring at the ceiling, Sarah realized how isolated she had become. She thought back to all the moments she'd turned down offers of help, dismissing them as unnecessary or even patronizing. Now she was paying the price, not just physically, but emotionally. But the consequences didn't end there. While recovering at home, Sarah noticed something unsettling. Her once friendly neighborhood felt eerily quiet. Margaret, her closest neighbor, had quietly moved away without saying goodbye. It wasn't until Emily mentioned it later that Sarah learned why. Mom, people have been trying to reach out, but you always act like you don't need anyone. They started feeling unwelcome. Those words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. In her quest to prove she was strong and self-reliant, she had inadvertently built walls around herself, alienating those who cared about her most. The irony stung deeply. Her refusal to accept help hadn't made her stronger. It had left her more vulnerable than ever. That night, Sarah sat alone in her dimly lit living room, tears streaming down her face. She vowed to change, not just for herself, but for the sake of reconnecting with the world she had slowly pushed away. Sarah's frugality had always been her badge of honor, a testament to years of careful planning and sacrifice. But what began as financial prudence slowly twisted into something far more destructive, a relentless grip on every penny that left her life barren of joy. It started innocently enough when she stumbled upon an online advertisement for miracle pills, promising relief from her chronic joint pain at half the cost of a doctor's visit. The website looked legitimate, filled with glowing testimonials and scientific jargon that seemed convincing. Ignoring Emily's advice to consult a physician, Sarah clicked purchase, lured by the promise of saving money. Weeks later, the pills arrived, but they were nothing more than sugar-coated placebos. Worse still, her condition worsened because she delayed proper medical care, leaving her bedridden and dependent on others. The fallout didn't stop there. Months earlier, her grandchildren had excitedly invited her on a family trip to the beach, a rare opportunity for everyone to reconnect. Yet Sarah hesitated, citing excuses about timing and finances. "This isn't the right time," she told him firmly, though deep down fear gnawed at her. "What if I spend this money now and need it later?" She convinced herself that waiting was wise. But as weeks turned into months, the invitation faded into silence. One evening, scrolling through old photos, Sarah came across a picture of her laughing with her grandkids during their last vacation. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the fleeting nature of these moments. By clinging too tightly to her savings, she had missed out on creating memories that could never be reclaimed. But perhaps the most devastating consequence of her penny-pinching ways struck closer to home, literally. In her quest to stretch every dollar, Sarah began cutting corners on groceries, opting for cheaper, processed foods instead of fresh produce. Meals became monotonous and nutritionally inadequate, leading to fatigue, dizziness, and eventually malnutrition. Her once vibrant energy dwindled, replaced by constant exhaustion. When Daniel visited one afternoon, he was horrified to see how frail his mother had become. "Mom, you can't keep living like this," he exclaimed, holding back tears. For maybe it's the first time Sarah saw herself through her son's eyes, not as a thrifty survivor, but as someone whose obsession with saving had robbed her of health, happiness, and connection. That night, sitting alone in her dimly lit kitchen, Sarah stared at the nearly empty shelves stocked with bargain bin goods. Was this truly the legacy she wanted to leave behind? Sarah had always considered herself a traditionalist, someone who valued the good old days when life seemed simpler and more meaningful. But her nostalgia often blinded her to the beauty of the present, especially when it came to understanding younger generations. One fateful afternoon, her beloved grandson Noah visited, eager to share his latest passion, a new video game he had been playing. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he described the intricate strategies and creative challenges of the game. But instead of listening, Sarah rolled her eyes and scoffed. "Back in my day, we didn't waste time staring at screens. We played outside, used our imaginations, and built real skills." Her words cut through the air like a knife, silencing Noah instantly. The room grew tense as Noah's face fell, his enthusiasm crushed under the weight of her criticism. He mumbled something about needing to leave and quickly retreated to his room, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. What she didn't realize at the time was that her harsh judgment wasn't just dismissive, it was deeply wounding. Later that evening, Emily stormed into Sarah's house, her voice trembling with anger. "How could you say those things to him, Mom? Do you know how much you hurt him? He looks up to you, and all you did was make him feel small and unimportant." Sarah tried to defend herself, insisting she was only speaking the truth, but Emily wouldn't hear it. "You're pushing him away, Mom. You're losing the connection you used to have because you refuse to see things from his perspective." As the days turned into weeks, Sarah noticed a painful shift in their relationship. Noah stopped visiting altogether, and when family gatherings occurred, he avoided sitting near her or engaging in conversation. Each glance he gave her was tinged with hurt and distance, a stark contrast to the warmth they once shared. Sarah replayed the argument in her mind repeatedly, trying to justify her actions, but the image of Noah's crushed expression haunted her. She realized too late that her rigid mindset had cost her something irreplaceable, the bond she cherished most. That night, sitting alone in her dimly lit living room, Sarah allowed herself to truly reflect. She thought about how much joy Noah's visits used to bring her, how his laughter filled the house with light. Now silence lingered where there had once been connection. It dawned on her that criticizing his interests wasn't protecting him, it was alienating him. For the first time, she understood that love meant meeting people where they are, not where you think they should be. Sarah had carried the weight of resentment for years, a silent storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. It all stemmed from an incident decades ago when her sister-in-law, Patricia, had betrayed her trust by spreading a deeply personal secret about Sarah's financial struggles to their entire family. The fallout had been devastating: judgmental stares at gatherings, whispered conversations behind her back, and a strained relationship with her husband Daniel, who felt torn between loyalty to his wife and his sibling. Though they eventually reconciled on the surface, Sarah never truly forgave Patricia. She buried the hurt deep inside, letting it fester like an untreated wound. Years passed and life moved forward, or so it seemed. One rainy afternoon, as Sarah sorted through old boxes in her attic, she stumbled upon a faded photograph of herself and Patricia laughing together during happier times. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her: nostalgia, anger, regret. Just then the doorbell rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. Standing on her porch was Patricia herself, looking frail and visibly shaken. "I need your help," Patricia said softly, her voice trembling. Reluctantly, Sarah invited her in, bracing herself for yet another uncomfortable encounter. Patricia revealed that she was battling terminal cancer and needed someone to care for her teenage granddaughter while she underwent treatment. Shock rippled through her. How could this woman who had once caused her such pain now sit across from her asking for aid? Old wounds reopened and bitterness surged within hers. Yet something about Patricia's vulnerability, a raw honesty she hadn't seen before, stirred a flicker of empathy in Sarah's heart. As days turned into weeks, Sarah found herself reluctantly agreeing to assist Patricia. During one particularly tense evening, Patricia broke down in tears and confessed a shocking truth. She hadn't intentionally betrayed Sarah all those years ago. Instead, she had confided in a mutual friend, believing it would remain private, only to have that person spread the information maliciously. "I've lived with the guilt every day since," Patricia admitted, her voice cracking. "But I was too proud to ever explain or apologize." The revelation hit Sarah like a thunderclap. All these years, she had clung to hatred, convinced of Patricia's malice. But the reality was far more complicated. Her rigid refusal to forgive had poisoned not just her relationship with Patricia, but also her marriage, her friendships, and even her own peace of mind. Worst of all, her inability to let go threatened her connection with Daniel, who grew increasingly frustrated by her coldness toward his sister. One night, after a heated argument with Daniel, Sarah sat alone in her dimly lit living room, tears streaming down her face. She realized how close she was to losing everything she held dear because of her stubbornness. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing Patricia's actions. It was about freeing herself from the chains of resentment. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and called Patricia. "We need to talk," she said simply. What followed was a long, tearful conversation that marked the beginning of healing, not just for them, but for Sarah's fractured family. Sarah had carried the weight of resentment for years, a silent storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. It all stemmed from an incident decades ago when her sister-in-law, Patricia, had betrayed her trust by spreading a deeply personal secret about Sarah's financial struggles to their entire family. The fallout had been devastating: judgmental stares at gatherings, whispered conversations behind her back, and a strained relationship with her husband, Daniel, who felt torn between loyalty to his wife and his sibling. Though they eventually reconciled on the surface, Sarah never truly forgave Patricia. She buried the hurt deep inside, letting it fester like an untreated wound. Years passed and life moved forward, or so it seemed. One rainy afternoon, as Sarah sorted through old books in her attic, she stumbled upon a faded photograph of herself and Patricia laughing together during happier times. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her: nostalgia, anger, regret. Just then the doorbell rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. Standing on her porch was Patricia herself, looking frail and visibly shaken. "I need your help," Patricia said softly, her voice trembling. Reluctantly, Sarah invited her in, bracing herself for yet another uncomfortable encounter. Patricia revealed that she was battling terminal cancer and needed someone to care for her teenage granddaughter while she underwent treatment. Shock rippled through Shra. How could this woman who had once caused her such pain now sit across from her asking for aid? Old wounds reopened and bitterness surged within her. Yet something about Patricia's vulnerability, a raw honesty she hadn't seen before, stirred a flicker of empathy in Sarah's heart. As days turned into weeks, Sarah found herself reluctantly agreeing to assist Patricia. During one particularly tense evening, Patricia broke down in tears and confessed a shocking truth. She hadn't intentionally betrayed Sarah all those years ago. Instead, she had confided in a mutual friend, believing it would remain private, only to have that person spread the information maliciously. "I've lived with the guilt every day since," Patricia admitted, her voice cracking. "But I was too proud to ever explain or apologize." The revelation hit Sarah like a thunderclap. All these years she had clung to hatred, convinced of Patricia's malice, but the reality was far more complicated. Her rigid refusal to forgive had poisoned not just her relationship with Patricia, but also her marriage, her friendships, and even her own peace of mind. Worst of all, her inability to let go threatened her connection with Daniel, who grew increasingly frustrated by her coldness toward his sister. One night, after a heated argument with Daniel, Sarah sat alone in her dimly lit living room, tears streaming down her face. She realized how close she was to losing everything she held dear because of her stubbornness. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing Patricia's actions. It was about freeing herself from the chains of resentment. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and called Patricia. "We need to talk," she said simply. What followed was a long, tearful conversation that marked the beginning of healing, not just for them, but for Sarah's fractured family.